Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually think about this before you answer. You wake up every single morning, you go to work, you trade hours of your life for a paycheck, you pay your bills, you maybe grab something small for yourself if there's anything left, and then you do it all over again the next day. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you keep thinking, if I just work harder, if I just push a little more, eventually it will get better. Eventually I'll get ahead. But here's the thing that nobody wants to say out loud. For most people, that day never comes. Not because they're lazy, not because they're not smart enough, but because the very system they're working inside was never designed to help them get ahead. It was designed, very deliberately, to keep them exactly where they are. Now, I know how that sounds. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, something a bitter person says when they're frustrated with life. But stay with me. Because what I'm about to walk you through isn't opinion, it isn't resentment, and it isn't some fringe idea. It's a pattern that has been built into the economy, the education system, the banking system, the tax code, and even the way you think about money, all working together in a way that makes it incredibly difficult for ordinary people to ever build real wealth. And the most dangerous part isn't the system itself. The most dangerous part is that most people never even realize they're inside it. They just keep running the same loop, blaming themselves for not getting further, never stopping to ask if the race was rigged before they even showed up to the starting line. Think about how you were taught about money growing up. Maybe your parents told you to save. Maybe they said get a good job with benefits. Maybe they said stay out of debt, work hard, and things will work out. And those aren't bad lessons. They come from genuine love and care, but they are incomplete in a way that costs people everything. Because not one of those lessons teaches you how wealth actually works. Not one of them explains how the wealthy accumulate money through assets rather than labor. Not one of them breaks down how compound interest works, how taxes are structured to benefit investors over workers, or how the entire game of building wealth is played differently depending on which side of the board you're sitting on. You were taught how to be a good employee. You were never taught how to be a wealthy person. And that gap in education, that wasn't an accident. Here's a fact that should stop you cold. The school system in most countries was not originally designed to produce free-thinking, financially independent human beings. It was designed during the industrial era to produce a reliable, compliant, trainable workforce, people who would show up on time, follow instructions, respect authority, and not ask too many difficult questions. Go back and look at the history of public education. Look at who funded it, who shaped its curriculum, and what purpose it was meant to serve. You will find that the goal was never to teach children how to own businesses, accumulate assets, or understand the mechanisms of wealth. The goal was to teach them how to become useful to people who already had wealth. And while the world has changed dramatically since then, the core structure of that education system has barely moved. You are still, in most cases, being prepared for a job, not for a life of financial freedom. And when you leave school, the system is waiting for you at every single turn. You graduate, often with debt, and you're told this is an investment in your future. You need the degree to get the job. You need the job to pay off the debt. You need to keep the job because the debt doesn't stop collecting interest while you figure things out. So right from the very beginning of your adult financial life, before you've earned a single dollar in your chosen field, you already owe money. You're already behind. And the first lesson the real world teaches you isn't how to build wealth, it's how to service debt. That is the first financial experience for tens of millions of people. Not investing, not building, not owning, owing. And it conditions you mentally in ways that last for decades, making you think that debt is just a normal, unavoidable part of adult life. Now let's talk about the job itself, because this is where the system really tightens its grip. You get hired, you get paid a salary or an hourly wage, and on the surface, this seems fair. You do work, you get compensated. Simple exchange. But what almost nobody explains to you is how the economics of employment actually works. When a company hires you for a job that pays you $50,000 a year, they are doing so because they expect to generate significantly more value from your labor than they pay you in salary. That gap between what you produce and what you're paid is called surplus value, and it is the fundamental engine of profit. This isn't criticism of business. Business needs profit to survive and grow, but you need to understand that your wage is not a reflection of your value or your contribution. Your wage is the minimum amount the employer needs to pay to keep you showing up. And the system is set up to ensure that you keep showing up, because the alternative, the cost of not having income, is too frightening to consider. Think about the word paycheck to paycheck. About 60 to 70% of Americans live this way. Not because they're irresponsible, not because they're spending their money on frivolous things, but because the math of ordinary working life was never designed to leave surplus. Rent has increased at a rate that wages have not matched. The cost of healthcare, childcare, education, transportation, and food has risen in ways that quietly swallow every small raise you've ever received. You get a 3% raise, and you feel good about it for about a week, until you realize that inflation was 4% and your rent just went up 6% and your health insurance premium increased again. You didn't actually move forward. You moved backwards, but slowly enough that it felt like standing still. The system is designed to always keep you just a little bit behind, just desperate enough to keep working, just stressed enough to not have the mental bandwidth to question any of it.
Let's talk about taxes, because this is one of the most blatant, in plain sight examples of how the system favors those who already have money. When you go to work as an employee, you are taxed on your income before you ever see it. The government takes its cut first, before you've paid your rent, bought your groceries, or covered any of your actual living expenses. Now compare that to how wealthy people and corporations are taxed. A corporation earns revenue, then deducts all of its expenses, salaries, equipment, travel, marketing, real estate, and only pays taxes on what's left over after all of that. A wealthy investor who earns income through capital gains, meaning their money made money, often pays a lower tax rate than a middle-class worker who earned that same amount by working a full-time job. This isn't some hidden secret. It's written directly into the tax code. The person who works for money pays more tax on it than the person whose money works for them. That single structural difference is one of the most powerful wealth-separating mechanisms ever created, and most people have no idea it exists. Now let's bring it to the ground level, to your daily life, because this isn't just about taxes and wages, it's about the way the system reaches into your wallet in ways you barely even notice. Think about financial products. Think about the bank account you probably have right now. Your money sits in that account, and the bank pays you maybe 0.5% interest, if that. Meanwhile, the bank lends your money to other people and collects 6, 8, 12, sometimes 25% interest on credit cards. You are the raw material. Your deposits are the inventory the bank sells. You get almost nothing for supplying that inventory, and they profit enormously from it. And then, when you need to borrow money yourself, you get to experience the other side of that equation, the side that charges you heavily for accessing the same pool of money you helped create. The entire financial services industry is built on the idea that people with money charge people without money for access to it, and the fee for being broke is extraordinarily high. Think about credit cards specifically, because they are one of the most psychologically sophisticated financial traps ever designed. They are convenient, they give you rewards, they feel like free money in the moment, and they've been engineered by rooms full of behavioral psychologists and data scientists to make spending as frictionless and pleasurable as possible. Paying with a card simply doesn't feel the same as handing over physical cash. Studies have shown that people spend more, significantly more, when they pay with cards versus cash. And then the bill comes, and maybe you can't pay it all, so you pay the minimum, which is another number that was very carefully calculated not to get you out of debt, but to keep you in debt for as long as legally possible while extracting the maximum amount of interest. The minimum payment is a masterpiece of financial engineering. It exists not to help you, it exists to ensure your debt survives long enough to be maximally profitable. Let's talk about housing, because for most people this is their single largest expense, and it's where one of the biggest misunderstandings about wealth lives. You've probably heard your whole life that buying a house is the best investment you'll ever make. Your parents believed it, your relatives believe it. Entire industries have built themselves around reinforcing this idea. And there's a partial truth to it,
Owning a home does build equity in a way that renting doesn't, and over long periods, property values generally trend upward. But the narrative is incomplete in ways that hurt people badly. Most people who buy a home take on a 30-year mortgage. They pay 2, sometimes 3 times the purchase price of the house over the life of that loan, when you factor in interest. The house is not entirely their asset while they have that mortgage. It's largely the bank's asset. The bank takes on minimal risk while collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest over 3 decades. And if you lose your income and can't make payments, the bank takes the house. You bear the risk, they collect the reward. That's not an investment partnership, that's something very different. What about the lottery, fast fashion, payday loans, rent-to-own furniture stores, pawn shops, check cashing services? Every single one of these businesses is located primarily in working class and lower income communities. Every single one of them extracts money from people who have very little of it. The lottery is mathematically designed to return less money than it takes in. It is a voluntary tax paid overwhelmingly by people who can least afford it, sold on the dream of escape. Payday loans charge effective annual interest rates that would be considered criminal in any other context. Rent-to-own stores charge you 2 and 3 times the retail price of furniture or appliances through monthly payments that seem manageable until you add them all up. These are not accidental market forces. These are deliberately designed financial products targeted at people whose financial desperation makes them vulnerable. And they are fully legal. They are fully legal because the people who write the laws are not the people using these services. Now, I want to be careful here because I don't want you to walk away from this feeling helpless, and I also don't want you to think that every wealthy person is some calculating villain twirling their mustache. That's not the point. The point is that systems have logic, systems have momentum, systems produce outcomes, and those outcomes don't require anyone to be deliberately cruel. They just require the structure to keep working the way it was built. Most wealthy people are not sitting in boardrooms plotting how to keep ordinary people poor. They're just operating inside a system that advantages them, just like you're operating inside a system that disadvantages you. Understanding that distinction is important because it removes the emotional charge and replaces it with something far more useful: clarity. You can't fight something you don't understand, but once you see it clearly, you can start making choices that work against it. Here's something nobody teaches you about the wealthy, and it's perhaps the single most important thing you can know. Wealthy people, as a class, do not primarily make their money by working. They make their money by owning. They own businesses, they own real estate, they own stocks, they own intellectual property, they own patents, they own assets of all kinds, and those assets generate income for them whether they show up or not. The wealthy person earns money while sleeping, while on vacation, while sitting in a meeting doing something else entirely. The working person earns money only while working, and the moment they stop working, the income stops with them. This is the fundamental divide. Not education, not ambition, even not initial capital, though that matters. The divide is between owning things and selling your time, and the system is structured to funnel almost everyone into the latter category, because a society full of owners is far harder to profit from than a society full of workers.
The consumer economy depends entirely on your participation as a spender, not as a saver or an investor. Every commercial you see, every advertisement in your social media feed, every limited time offer and flash sale and influencer partnership exists for one purpose: to convert your income into someone else's profit as quickly as possible. Think about how meticulously designed the modern retail and digital economy is to ensure that money does not sit still in your hands. The entertainment industry, the fashion industry, the food delivery industry, the gaming industry, they are not evil. They provide things people genuinely enjoy, but they are extraordinarily good at ensuring that what you earn, you spend. And they have the benefit of decades of psychological research, the finest data science in human history, and platforms that are designed from the ground up to be as engaging and time-consuming as possible. Your attention is their product. Your spending is their revenue. And the more time you spend consuming their content, the less time you have to think about building anything of your own. There's a concept that does not get talked about nearly enough, and it is called financial stress tax. When you are broke, Every single financial decision you make is more expensive than it would be for someone who is not broke. You can't buy in bulk because you can't afford the upfront cost, so you buy small quantities at higher per unit prices. You can't afford preventative health care, so small problems become large ones that are far more expensive to treat. You can't afford to maintain your car properly, so it breaks down and costs you far more in repairs than maintenance would have. You can't build an emergency fund, so when something unexpected happens, and something always happens, you borrow money at high interest rates. Being poor is expensive. Living paycheck to paycheck is expensive. The system ensures that the cost of not having money is borne entirely by the people who have the least of it, while the cost of having money is subsidized by the returns that money generates. $1 in the right place makes more dollars. $1 in the wrong situation loses value every day. Let's talk about the psychology of all of this, because the system doesn't just work through economics, it works through belief. It works through the stories you tell yourself about why you are where you are and what is possible for someone like you. From childhood, working class and middle class people are taught directly and indirectly that wealth is the result of extraordinary luck, extraordinary talent, or extraordinary ruthlessness, that it is not a normal outcome for normal people, that wanting it too badly is greedy, that money doesn't buy happiness, that rich people must have done something dishonest to get there. These beliefs are not neutral. They are financially paralyzing. They ensure that the average person never takes the steps that lead to real wealth because they have already been convinced before they even start that those steps aren't for them. The system doesn't even need to stop you from building wealth. It just needs to convince you that it was never really an option. And it uses shame masterfully. If you're in debt, you're told you should have been more responsible. If you're struggling financially, you're told you're bad at managing money. If you grew up poor, there's an invisible cultural assumption that your circumstances reflect your character. This is profoundly dishonest, but it is profoundly effective because shame turns outward systemic failures into inward personal failures. The second you believe your financial situation is entirely your fault, the second you accept personal moral responsibility for being in a system designed to disadvantage you, you stop looking at the structure. You stop asking the harder questions. You just try harder inside the same broken framework. And trying harder inside a broken framework produces exhaustion, not results. Here's what actually changes things, and I want to be direct about this. The path out is not a secret, but it requires a total shift in how you think about money and time. The first move is understanding the difference between income and wealth. Income is what you earn. Wealth is what you own. They are not the same thing, and earning more income does not automatically create wealth unless you deliberately redirect some of that income into assets. An asset is anything that puts money into your pocket without requiring your direct time in exchange. It can be a share of a company, a rental property, a small business, content that generates passive revenue, a portfolio of investments, intellectual property. The category matters less than the principle. You need to stop thinking about money as something you earn and spend and start thinking about it as something you deploy. Every dollar you have is either being deployed for you or being deployed against you. There is no neutral position. The second shift is understanding the compounding gap. Money grows exponentially when left alone and allowed to compound, meaning the returns generate their own returns over time. This is the single most powerful force in personal finance, and it is also the force that works most brutally against people who are in debt. When compound interest works for you, in investments, it quietly, invisibly, enormously expands your wealth. When it works against you, in debt, it does the same thing in reverse, quietly and invisibly expanding how much you owe. The gap between someone who starts investing at 22 and someone who starts at 32 is not 10 years. It is, when compounding is factored in, potentially $1 million or more over a lifetime. Time is the variable nobody tells you about when you're young. They tell you about effort, they tell you about education. They almost never tell you that the single most valuable financial resource you have in your 20s is time, and that every year you spend not putting money to work is a year that can never be reclaimed. The third shift is the most uncomfortable, and it is about spending. Not in a punishing, depression-based way. That approach doesn't work, and it doesn't work because it treats spending as a moral failure rather than a strategic choice. The real question to ask about every significant purchase is not, can I afford this, but what is the opportunity cost of this? Every dollar you spend on something that depreciates, something that loses value after you buy it, is a dollar that could have been deployed into something that appreciates. This doesn't mean you should never enjoy your money or never buy things that make your life better. It means you should be conscious, genuinely conscious of what you're trading when you buy things. The car you upgrade unnecessarily, the apartment you rent that's larger than you need, the subscription services you barely use. None of these are catastrophic on their own, but the pattern they represent, the pattern of trading future wealth for present comfort, is one of the most reliable ways to stay exactly where you are.
The system also wins by keeping you distracted, and I mean that both literally and economically. The average American spends more than 4 hours a day on social media and entertainment platforms. That is 4 hours a day that could include learning about investing, building a side income, improving a valuable skill, or simply thinking clearly about your financial future. This is not a criticism of anyone. These platforms are designed by some of the most brilliant engineers in the world specifically to be as engaging as possible, to trigger dopamine responses and create behavioral loops that keep you coming back. But you need to understand what that time costs you, not just in the abstract, but in real terms. The financial education that could change your entire life trajectory is available for free. The knowledge that wealthy people pay private advisors and business schools to learn is sitting in books and videos and resources that cost almost nothing. The information gap is not the problem. The attention gap is the problem. And the system profits every single minute that your attention is directed away from building something of your own. Let's talk about one more thing, because it might be the most important. The system is maintained not through force, but through consent, through the fact that people accept it, normalize it, and participate in it without questioning it. The most powerful mechanism of control is not a law or a policy. It is a belief that things cannot be any different than they are. When you believe that your situation is natural, inevitable, and deserved, you become the most reliable enforcer of the very system that limits you. You work harder at your job to earn a promotion that barely keeps up with inflation. You take on debt to buy things that make you feel successful without making you wealthy. You discourage your children from taking entrepreneurial risks because you've been taught that stable employment is safety, not realizing that in a world of layoffs and automation, a skill and an income stream you own is far safer than a job someone else controls. You repeat the cycle, not out of weakness, but out of a deeply conditioned belief that this is simply how the world works. But here is the truth that the system does not want to become widely understood. The rules that determine financial outcomes in this world can be learned, they can be studied, they can be applied. They are not magic, they are not exclusive to certain bloodlines or zip codes or degrees. They are a set of principles about how money works, how assets grow, how wealth is built and maintained that have been applied successfully by people who started with very little, people who came from difficult circumstances, people who were never supposed to win. The barriers are real, the disadvantages are real, the structural unfairness is real and documented, but the path through it also exists and it has been walked before, and every single person who walked it started by doing exactly what you are doing right now, by refusing to accept the explanation they were handed, by looking past the surface, and by asking the harder question. If the game was designed this way, then what do I need to know to play it differently?
That question is the beginning of everything. It is the crack in the wall. Because the moment you stop asking why you're not succeeding and start asking what the rules actually are, you shift from being someone the system operates on to being someone who starts to understand how the system operates. And that shift, that single shift in perspective, is more valuable than any raise, any degree, any windfall you could ever receive. The raise can be taken away, the degree can become obsolete, the windfall can be spent, but the understanding of how money actually moves through this world, who it moves toward and why, and what it takes to position yourself on the right side of that current, that cannot be taken away. That is yours. And that, more than anything else, is what they never wanted you to have.